Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, celebrity interviews, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
Welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. But for our radio audience at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com, we're glad that you all could be with us. Also tuning in to our friends at iHeartRadio and Amazon Music Podcast. We're glad you all could be with us as well. Well, I think all of us kind of went crazy a couple weeks ago when the official Queen account on YouTube released a lyric video for the single Face It Along. Of course, once again, being able to hear the voice of Freddie Mercury. At the time we're having this conversation today, over 11 million views on that. So there's so much interest and fascination and love for Queen. So that's why our next guest is so special. We're excited to welcome acclaimed music journalist Mark Blake to our program. His new book is called Magnifico. It's the A to Z of Queen. I want to talk to him not only about what it's been like for him to be able to look at the history, but also to share some things that none of us knew about Queen before and what it's been like for him to see the response to it. Mark, thank you so much for the time. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
So, Mark, this is one of those things, I mean, you are known for being able to write about music and pop culture. What has it been like for you to see that continued love and interest when it comes to Queen?
It's fascinating, really, because I don't think anyone could have predicted it, you know, in those initial years after Freddie Mercury died. And I remember interviewing Brian May and Roger Taylor in the 90s, and Queen was kind of dead and buried then. They were working on solo projects. I think the idea that there'd be a movie, a stage musical, the fact that they tour again with someone like Adam Lambert or whatever, that seemed a long way off. So it's kind of fascinating, but it's nice to get surprises. It's been a pleasant surprise, I think.
And you've been able to do something, Mark, even some of the early reviews already coming in on Amazon, right, for those who have read the book, said, you know, even for those who think they know the story of Queen, this is a book they want to get. Talk to us about that. What kind of an undertaking was it for you to kind of take us through the A to Z when it comes to a group as big as Queen?
Well, I think the secret with it is to look for those parts of the story that just haven't been told before. And there's a lot in this book about Freddie Mercury's early life. When he first came to England from Zanzibar in India, which is where he'd grown up and been educated. And, you know, it was interesting to talk to his childhood friends, because back then he was just called Freddie, they called him Freddie, but he was Freddie Bulsara. And you know, it was interesting for them to then suddenly lose touch with him and then see him 2 or 3 years later on television performing as Freddie Mercury, and they were just astonished that it was the same kid they'd known and the same kid they'd sort of grown up with. So I think that was a part of it for me, but also just going into the songs and how they worked together and how they wrote those songs and what inspired them. Because you had 4 songwriters here that were very, very different people, very conflicting personalities sometimes. And all of that feeds into the music as well.
And it is something I think that people have really gotten to see. You mentioned, of course, the movie that really did, I mean, put such a wonderful spotlight on the music for one, of course, but also on the songs that so many people have gotten to know. Talk to us about that for you, Mark. I mean, as you've been able to, again, have conversations like this about this book, and then, of course, doing the research, what was it like for you to see the impact and how really they were ahead of their time, it seems like, in a lot of ways?
I think they had, I mean, again, it comes back to this 4 songwriters thing. I mean, that is such an asset for any band. I mean, you had 4 songwriters in the Beatles, but, you know, with Queen, you had 4 songwriters that actually wrote hits as well. They all wrote hits. And I think that's kind of the secret weapon with Queen. And it meant that they could leapfrog and go from different styles of music. And I think that's something that it helped the longevity of this music. If you don't like one Queen song, there might be another one along a few minutes later that you do like. You know, that I think it's the broadness of the back catalogue that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Mark, as I mentioned in my introduction, I mean, you are known, of course, I mean, as an acclaimed music journalist, of course, an award-winning author. You've written about some of the big names out there. Talk to us about your own connection to music and Queen. When did that kind of begin for you?
Well, it would have begun with me, I think, around the time of Bohemian Rhapsody or Killer Queen, so in 74, 75. I just remember being a young kid sitting cross-legged on the floor in my parents' living room, and they were on TV. there was a music show here in the UK called Top of the Pops, and they were on there. And I remember the video for Bohemian Rhapsody was unlike anything I'd seen at the time. You kind of went to school the next day and kids were talking about it. It was one of those sort of moments. You went, did you see this band? I don't know. I can't say to you that I loved it or I liked it immediately, but it stayed with me. And then a few years later, I started going to see them live. And, that was a revelation because I think they were always probably one of the best live bands I ever saw with Freddie Mercury. They were consistently good live right through till he stopped performing with them. So I think that's, when I was lucky enough to start writing about music, it was a pleasure to go and talk to members of Queen because they were a band that I had a connection with, I realised, going back to being, a young kid.
And I think that, again, kind of brings into why there is such love and why a book like Magnifico is so important. One of the things that's been said in praising you, Mark, about this book is not only, of course, when it comes to the trivia and being able to kind of look through some of that, but also when it comes to some of the meanings behind some of the songs. Talk to us about that, what that was like for you to discover for yourself.
Well, I think there's a lot of real emotions and real life in some of Queen's songs, and I think that's the difference between them as writers. I think Freddie Mercury often hid his feelings and hid his emotions a little bit, so he got hidden behind big gestures. We are the champions being a prime example. I think he was actually quite an insecure guy, and I think if you dig a bit deeper, some of that insecurity comes across in some of those songs. He wrote a lot about his kind of early male love of his boyfriends after he'd left his girlfriend and realised he was gay. He wrote about that, but he wrote about it in a very roundabout way. And I think later on, when he knew he was dying, some of that stuff starts to come across in the songs, particularly Brian May's songwriting as well, with things like, Want to Live Forever, which was written for film, but obviously he had a lot to say about what was going on in their real lives at the time. So I think there's a lot more emotion and real life stuff, if you want, in these songs than sometimes we give them credit for.
Wow. And that's why I think a book like this is so important. I began in my introduction by talking about the new song that we got to enjoy a couple of weeks ago, Face It Alone. What was that like for you to hear, especially when it comes to Freddie's voice there, Mark?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is how good his voice still was, and obviously he was dying at that point. He knew he was seriously ill, and his message to the rest of the band was, just go in the studio, stay in the studio as long as I can do it, get as much music out of me as you can. I think it's interesting it's taken this long for them to put that out, because it does make you wonder how many other songs they've got stashed away there for the future, because obviously that album came out I think in 1989 or something like that, so it's a long time ago now. It's quite a dark ballad. You do start to listen to lyrics and wonder what he's singing about, but I think having listened to that stuff, it's remarkable how great his voice still was. His voice never went, even when he was seriously ill. As long as he was recording, he still had the voice.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful song, and as I mentioned already, over 11 million views on that lyric video, on the official video, since it was released a couple weeks ago, and it's a great listen, and I'm looking forward to diving into Magnifico, the A to Z of Queen as well. Mark, thank you so much for the time. The book is available through our friends at Amazon.com. Of course, our audience can be able to get it from their favorite bookstore as well. Mark, how can they stay connected with you?
How does what, sorry?
Yeah, how can they stay connected with you? How can our audience stay connected with you?
People can connect with me through my website, markrblake.com. Yeah.
All right. Well, Mark, congratulations again, and looking forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
More than welcome. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live. Let's go make today amazing. Take care.